I never thought my life would lead me to this place, a sprawling military base in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by endless fences and guarded by men with rifles slung over their shoulders. As the taxi rolled past the final checkpoint, my palms felt clammy. This wasn't just another nanny job. This was stepping into a world where silence spoke louder than words, and discipline outweighed compassion. My name is Emily Reed. I'm 26, and if I'm being honest, I didn't take this job because it felt like a calling. I took it because I had no choice. With rent overdue, and my younger brother's college tuition hanging over my head, I couldn't afford to say no when the agency called about a special assignment. The moment the car stopped in front of the house, I knew I was out of my depth. The place didn't look like a home. It looked like headquarters. The lawn was perfectly trimmed, not a blade of grass out of place. 2 black SUVs were parked symmetrically in the driveway, and standing at the door, arms crossed and jaw tight, was Colonel Nathaniel Grant. They said he was a decorated officer, the kind of man who could bark orders, and entire battalions would move. They didn't tell me his eyes were cold steel, or that he radiated the kind of authority that made you want to straighten your back and salute, Miss Reed. His voice was sharp, efficient. Yes, sir. I hated how nervous I sounded. He didn't invite me in. He just pivoted on his heel and strode into the house, expecting me to follow. Inside, the air was heavy. The living room was immaculate, but it felt sterile. No toys scattered on the floor. No family photos on the walls. Just clean lines, neutral colors, and an eerie quiet. "You'll be caring for my son Lucas," he said briskly. "He's 5. Diagnosed with severe autism last year. His routines are to be followed to the letter. No deviations. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," I replied, though a knot was forming in my stomach. He stopped at a closed door and placed his hand on the knob. "He doesn't speak much. Don't take it personally." When he opened the door, I caught my first glimpse of Lucas. He was sitting on the carpet, lining up toy trucks in perfect rows. He didn't look up when we entered. His sandy blonde hair fell into his eyes, and his small fingers moved with precision, aligning each truck so precisely it looked like a military parade. "This is Miss Reed, Colonel Grant," announced. Lucas gave no reaction. Not a glance, not a sound. I wanted to kneel down and say hello, but something about the tension in the room stopped me. Colonel Grant exhaled sharply. "I have work. Dinner is at 6 sharp. Mrs. Harris, the housekeeper, will show you your room." And just like that, he was gone. I stood there watching the boy in front of me. He didn't seem severe. He seemed lost. And somehow, deep down, I knew this wasn't just going to be another job. This was going to change everything. Lucas didn't even flinch when the door clicked shut behind Colonel Grant. He stayed crouched on the carpet, his tiny fingers adjusting the position of a red toy truck by less than an inch. From where I stood, it looked perfect already. "Hi, Lucas," I said softly, crouching to his level. My voice felt out of place in the stillness of that room, like shouting in a library. No response. I tried again a little closer this time. "I'm Emily. I'll be helping take care of you for a while." Nothing. Not even a glance. His focus didn't waver from his task: green truck, red truck, blue truck, all lined up with military precision. For a split second, his hand paused on a yellow one. His fingers brushed against the carpet, then stiffened, and he withdrew his hand like the toy might burn him. I wanted to ask him about the trucks, about why the yellow one didn't fit, but something told me words weren't the way in. Instead, I stayed quiet. I sat down on the far edge of the room and watched. The housekeeper, Mrs. Harris, had warned me earlier, "He won't talk to you. Don't take it to heart." None of the nannies lasted more than a week, but sitting there, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lucas wasn't unwilling. He was afraid. It was in the way his shoulders tensed every time a floorboard creaked, in the way his eyes darted to the door every few seconds, as if expecting someone to barge in and reprimand him. This wasn't autism, not in the way the textbooks described. This was something deeper, rawer. A memory bubbled up from years ago. Me, 7 years old, huddled in the corner of my aunt's house after Mom died. I'd lined up crayons by color over and over, because it felt like the only thing I could control. I cleared my throat gently. "Those are some cool trucks you've got there, buddy." His fingers stilled. For the briefest moment, he looked up. Not fully just a flicker of eye contact before his gaze darted back down. But it was there. A flash of fear. I smiled even though my heart felt heavy. "It's okay. You don't have to say anything." Lucas went back to aligning his trucks, but his movements were slower now, less precise. Maybe I thought he doesn't need more specialists telling him what's wrong. Maybe he just needs someone to sit here and not expect anything. I stayed on the floor until Mrs. Harris called us for dinner. Lucas never spoke, never even looked my way again. But as I stood to leave, I noticed something strange. The yellow truck. It was no longer on the floor. It was in his lap, clutched tight in his little hands. The next morning, they sent in the therapist. I wasn't told her name, just that she had been working with Lucas for months, and I was expected to observe quietly while she conducted the session. We were in the same sterile room. Lucas sat cross-legged on the floor, his trucks neatly lined up in front of him. The therapist, a tall woman in a sharp blazer, pulled up a chair and placed herself squarely in his line of sight. "Lucas," she said firmly, "look at me." He didn't move. "Lucas, eyes on me." Her voice sharpened. I shifted uncomfortably. Something about her tone felt less like guidance and more like command. "Do you want the trucks?" she pressed, picking up the red one he'd been holding earlier. "You can have it if you look at me." Lucas's little hands curled into fists. His lip quivered. I opened my mouth to say something, then closed it. This wasn't my place. Not yet. "Lucas." She leaned forward. "Look at me, or the trucks go away." He whimpered, a sound so small it barely filled the room. Then he covered his face with both hands, rocking slightly. Something inside me broke. "He's not ready," I said before I could stop myself. The therapist turned her head. Eyebrows arched. "Excuse me," I swallowed hard. "You're scaring him." "This is standard behavioral therapy," she replied coolly. "If we don't enforce eye contact, he'll never." "Maybe he doesn't need this," I interrupted, my voice shaking. "Maybe he's not autistic at all. Maybe he's just scared." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Behind me, a low voice growled. "What did you just say?" I turned. Colonel Grant stood in the doorway, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable, except for his eyes. His eyes burned. I stumbled. "I think Lucas." "You think his voice was quiet, dangerous. I have 6 specialists telling me my son is on the spectrum, and you a nanny for less than 24 hours. Think you know better." I opened my mouth to explain, but he cut me off. "You're done here, Miss Reed. Pack your things. You're leaving this house today." Lucas let out a strangled cry. I looked back at him. He wasn't rocking anymore. He was staring at me wide-eyed, breathing fast. "I'm sorry," I whispered to him, even as my throat tightened. But I wasn't sorry, not for speaking up. Because in that moment, I knew I was right. The first few days in the Grant house felt like living inside a museum. Every surface gleamed. Every picture frame hung perfectly straight. The floors were so spotless I felt guilty for leaving footprints. But it wasn't the cleanliness that unsettled me. It was the silence. Silence that wrapped around the walls like a heavy curtain. I'd rise at dawn and tiptoe down the hall to peek into Lucas's room. He'd already be awake, sitting cross-legged on his carpet, his toy trucks perfectly aligned in front of him. Not playing, just arranging, over and over again. Breakfast came at 7:00 sharp. The housekeeper, Mrs. Harris, would set down a plate of eggs and toast in front of Lucas. He'd eat without a word, chewing methodically, his little hands gripping the fork with military precision. He never looked up, never asked for more. No one spoke to him either. When Colonel Grant came home, it was usually well past dark. I'd hear the garage door hum open, then his boots clicking on the marble floor. He never entered Lucas's room. He just stopped at the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted by the hall light. I'd seen him stand there for minutes at a time, his arms crossed tight across his chest, as if holding himself together. "Good night, son," he'd murmur eventually, so low I almost missed it. And then he'd walk away. He never stepped inside. He never tucked Lucas in, never kissed his forehead, or whispered sweet dreams like parents are supposed to. At dinner one evening, I tried to break the ice. "Lucas, do you want to help me set the table tomorrow?" He didn't answer. "Or maybe we could bake cookies together." No response. Colonel Grant, sitting at the head of the table with his untouched glass of water, finally looked up. "You're wasting your breath," he said flatly. "He doesn't talk. Not to anyone." I swallowed hard. Maybe he will, if we misread. His voice carried the weight of a man used to commanding soldiers. "Your job is to keep him fed and safe. Leave the rest to the professionals." I bit my tongue, but deep down, I couldn't shake what I'd seen earlier that day. When I'd offered Lucas a napkin at lunch, his little fingers brushed mine for a split second. He flinched like he'd touched fire, but then he didn't pull away right away. It was so quick I almost convinced myself I imagined it, but I didn't. There was a boy in there beneath all that silence. I just didn't know how to reach him yet. I wasn't supposed to change anything. The binder they handed me on my first day spelled it out in bold letters. "Follow all routines exactly as outlined. Do not alter behavioral protocols without prior approval." But on the fourth night, standing in that pristine bathroom with its cold white tiles, I broke the rules. Lucas sat quietly in the tub, his knees tucked under his chin. He didn't splash or play like other 5-year-olds might. He didn't even look at the little rubber duck floating near the faucet. I knelt beside him, holding a washcloth in my hand, and for some reason, I began to hum. It wasn't planned. It just slipped out an old lullaby my mother used to sing when I was little, the kind of song that felt like a warm blanket on stormy nights. At first, Lucas didn't react, but then his fingers tapped the edge of the tub almost in rhythm. I kept humming softer now. And then I heard it, a faint sound barely more than a whisper. Lucas, humming along. The notes were off-key, fragile, but it was there. I froze, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly in case he stopped. His lips barely parted, and the sound was more like a hum than a melody. But it was his. And for the first time since I'd met him, I felt like I was seeing the real Lucas. Not the silent boy in the reports, not the clinical case the therapist spoke of. Just a child clinging to a song like a lifeline. "Beautiful buddy," I whispered, smiling even as tears threatened to fall. The next morning, Dr. Whitaker cornered me in the hallway. She was the lead therapist. Her heels clicked sharply on the hardwood floor as she approached. "I heard about last night," she said, her tone clipped. I straightened my back. What about it? Humming to him in the bath. "That's not part of his routine," he hummed back, I said quietly. Her lips tightened. "Miss Reed, this isn't daycare. This is a carefully constructed therapeutic environment. If you can't follow instructions, I'll be forced to report this to Colonel Grant." My hands clenched at my sides. Maybe what he needs isn't more instructions. Maybe he needs a little kindness. Her glare could have frozen fire. "Do not interfere." I watched her march away, my chest tight. I knew I was risking everything, but when I thought of Lucas humming with me for those few precious seconds, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. It was almost midnight when I heard Lucas whimpering. The house was silent except for the ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. I slipped out of my small guest room barefoot and padded toward his door. The light from his night lamp spilled faintly into the corridor. He was curled up in bed knees tucked tight, clutching the yellow truck I'd seen him holding earlier. His breaths came quick and shallow. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, kneeling by his side. "Nightmares?" He didn't answer, of course, but his little fingers gripped the blanket tighter. I smoothed his hair gently, and without thinking began to sing. It was the same lullaby from the night before, the one that had coaxed a hum from him in the bathroom. At first, he stayed stiff as a board. Then I felt it a tiny shift. His shoulders softened. His breathing slowed. His eyelids fluttered like he was fighting sleep. And then he hummed, just for a second. A faint, trembling sound that sent a rush of warmth through my chest. "You're safe, Lucas," I murmured. "It's okay to rest." A voice behind me cut through the moment like a blade. "What do you think you're doing?" I jumped, my heart slamming into my ribs. Colonel Grant stood in the doorway, arms folded, face carved from stone. His presence seemed to pull all the air out of the room. I stammered. He was upset. I thought a lullaby might help. His jaw tightened. "That's not your job. I know, but you're here to follow the schedule, to keep him clean and fed, not to play therapist, not to improvise." I straightened my voice low but steady. "With respect, sir. The schedule isn't comforting him." This did. "Miss Reed," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut glass stay in your lane. I wanted to argue, to tell him his son wasn't a machine to be programmed, that he was a little boy lonely and afraid. But the words caught in my throat. "Yes, sir," I whispered instead. He held my gaze for a moment longer, then turned on his heel and strode down the hall. The sound of his boots faded into the silence. I looked back at Lucas. He was watching me now, his eyes wide and unblinking. "I'm not giving up on you," I whispered, "even if your father thinks I should." And for just a heartbeat, I thought I saw something flicker in his gaze, something that felt dangerously close to hope. The next morning, Dr. Whitaker returned for another session. I stood quietly in the corner of the therapy room, my hands clasped tight behind my back. The walls felt like they were closing in white, clinical, suffocating. Lucas sat cross-legged on a little chair, his eyes glued to the floor. His tiny hands gripped the hem of his sweater so tightly, I worried the fabric might tear. "Lucas, doctor," Whitaker said firmly, holding up a bright red flashcard with the word ball, written in bold. "Say it. Ball." Lucas didn't move. She leaned closer. "Ball. Say it, or we're not moving on." Still nothing. My throat tightened. "Lucas?" She pressed her voice sharper now. "Say it. Ball." The little boy's lips parted slightly. A faint squeak escaped him. His fingers started twisting violently in his lap. Louder, she demanded. "We need to hear you." He whimpered. It was so soft, but it cut me deeper than any scream could have. "Lucas, we've talked about this." Dr. Whitaker continued, her tone clipped. "No progress means no privileges. Say the word." 30 minutes passed like this. 30 minutes of her repeating the same instruction, her voice growing colder each time. 30 minutes of Lucas's small frame shrinking further into itself. At one point, he covered his ears and rocked back and forth. Something inside me snapped. "Stop," I blurted, stepping forward before I even realized what I was doing. Dr. Whitaker turned sharply. "Miss Reed, you are not authorized to interfere." "He's terrified," I said, my voice trembling. "Look at him. He's not learning, he's shutting down." "This is how progress happens," she countered. We pushed through resistance until I didn't let her finish. I dropped to my knees in front of Lucas and gently took his hands in mine. "Hey," I whispered so softly I wasn't sure she could hear. "It's okay, sweetheart. You don't have to. Not right now." For a moment there was only silence. Then Lucas let out a choked sob and flung his little arms around my neck. I froze. And then I hugged him back, holding his trembling body close. "You're safe," I murmured, fighting to keep my own voice steady. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for." Behind me, I heard Dr. Whitaker's heels clicking against the floor as she stormed out. But I didn't care, because for the first time since I arrived, Lucas wasn't just surviving. He was clinging to me like I was the only safe place left in his world. And I wasn't about to let go. I didn't hear the door open. But I felt the shift in the air before I saw him. Colonel Grant's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "What the hell is going on here?" I froze. Lucas froze too, his little fingers still tangled in the fabric of my shirt. I turned slowly to face him. He stood in the doorway, his uniform pressed to perfection. His jaw clenched so tightly, I thought it might shatter. His hands were balled into fists at his sides. "Colonel Lecters," and it began, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let him go." I hesitated. "Now." I loosened my arms, and Lucas slipped from my lap. He stepped back, his wide eyes darting between me and his father. Miss Reed, Colonel Grant said, his tone so controlled it made my stomach churn. "Explain yourself." I swallowed hard. Lucas was overwhelmed. He couldn't handle the pressure. I thought he needed comfort, not more commands. "That wasn't your decision to make," he snapped. "He's a little boy," I said, my voice cracking. "Not a soldier to be trained." He was crying. "You're out of line." His voice was louder now, echoing off the walls. "You've been here less than a week, and already you think you know better than the specialists I've hired. I don't care what their degrees say." I shot back before I could stop myself. "I care about what I see, and what I see is a child who's terrified and lonely. And enough. His voice was sharp, final. I flinched. You're fired. The words landed like a punch to the gut. Pack your bags and leave my house. Today. My throat tightened. Please. Colonel, just listen. I said leave. Lucas made a soft sound, almost like a gasp, but his father didn't seem to notice. I nodded, biting hard on the inside of my cheek to keep the tears at bay. Yes, sir. I stood my legs trembling and walked past him without another word. As I climbed the stairs to the small guest room, my vision blurred. My suitcase sat in the corner, still half full from when I'd arrived. I shoved my clothes into it blindly, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. This wasn't just a job to me anymore, but maybe it had been foolish to believe I could make a difference here. Downstairs, I heard the muffled sound of Colonel Grant's voice and the slam of a door, and underneath it, I thought I heard something else. A small, choked sob. The suitcase felt heavier with every step I took. I gripped the handle tighter, forcing my feet to keep moving down the long, polished hallway. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure even the house could hear it. This was it. 1 week in, and I was already being shown the door. At the bottom of the stairs, I paused for just a second. The front door loomed ahead like a final goodbye. I glanced over my shoulder. Lucas's room was down the hall. His light was still on. Don't look back, Emily, I told myself. It'll only make it harder. I reached for the doorknob. Emmy. The sound stopped me cold. It wasn't loud, not much more than a whisper, but it was clear. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Emmy. Don't go. The suitcase slipped from my hand, thudding against the floor. I turned. Lucas was running down the hallway, his bare feet padding against the hardwood, tears streaming down his cheeks. Don't go, he sobbed again, his small arms flinging around my waist. I knelt instinctively, my own tears blurring my vision as I pulled him close. Oh, sweetheart, I whispered, holding him tight. You talked. It wasn't until that moment I realized just how long I'd been waiting to hear his voice. 2 years, they said. 2 years of silence. But here he was clinging to me, like his life depended on it. His little voice trembling but strong enough to break through all the noise in my head. Don't go, he repeated, burying his face in my shoulder. Behind us, I heard footsteps. Heavy, steady. Colonel Grant stood at the end of the hall, his expression frozen in something I couldn't read. Shock, maybe. Or fear. Lucas. He murmured, his voice cracking slightly, but the boy didn't look at him. He just held on to me tighter. I stroked Lucas's hair, pressing my cheek to the top of his head. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered, even though I wasn't sure if that was a promise I could keep. And in that moment, for the first time since stepping into this house, I felt hope. Not just for Lucas, but for all of us. The hallway felt frozen in time. Lucas's tiny fingers dug into my sweater, as if he thought I might vanish if he let go. His body shook with quiet sobs, but his voice still echoed in my head. Don't go, Emmy. 2 years of silence broken in an instant. Behind us, Colonel Grant stood stiff as a statue. For once, his mask of military precision slipped, and for the first time, I saw something raw flicker in his eyes. Fear. He cleared his throat, but the sound came out rougher than usual. Lucas, he said softly, taking a tentative step forward. Lucas didn't move. Lucas, son, you spoke. The boy turned his face deeper into my shoulder, refusing to look at his father. Grant's jaw tightened and he dragged a hand down his face. He looked at me, then his icy gaze less certain than before. What? What did you do? I didn't do anything, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I just stopped trying to fix him. And I let him be a little boy. His brows furrowed. This doesn't make sense. The doctors. Maybe they're wrong, I interrupted gently. Maybe he doesn't need more protocols and drills. Maybe he just needs connection. Grant exhaled sharply, his hand curling into a fist at his side. He looked like a man at war with himself. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. I don't trust you, he said. His voice was low, controlled, but not as sharp as before. But he spoke, for the first time in 2 years. I swallowed hard, holding Lucas tighter. So stay. For now. Relief washed over me, but I didn't let it show. I'll stay on one condition, I said quietly. His eyes narrowed. You're negotiating with me. Yes, I said firmly. No more drills. No more forcing him into things he's not ready for. Just connection. That's all I'm asking. His lips pressed into a hard line. You're asking me to go against everything the specialists recommend. I'm asking you to see your son, I said softly. Not his diagnosis. Not the reports. Just him. For a moment, the only sound in the hall was Lucas's soft sniffles. Finally, Grant nodded once, curtly. Fine. But I'm watching. Every move you make. That's fair, I replied. He turned and walked away, his boots echoing on the hardwood. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Lucas shifted in my arms, his little voice whispering against my neck. Stay, Emmy. My chest tightened. I'm here, sweetheart, I whispered back. I'm not going anywhere. The first time I saw Lucas smile, it was so quick I almost missed it. We were sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, scraps of paper scattered around us. I had taught him how to fold a simple paper airplane. See like this, I said, creasing the edge carefully. Now you try. His small hands clumsily mirrored my movements. The first one came out lopsided. The second was better. By the third, he was pressing the folds with surprising focus when I launched his finished plane across the room, and it glided all the way to the couch. Something magical happened. He giggled. Not loud, not long, but real. The sound hit me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. There it is, I whispered with a grin. That's your laugh, huh? Lucas ducked his head shyly, but his lips curved upward again. The next afternoon, I found an old harmonica in the kitchen junk drawer. Ever tried one of these? I asked, holding it up. He shook his head. I blew into it, producing a clumsy note that made us both flinch. Okay. That was terrible. Your turn. He hesitated, then took it carefully in his hands. He pressed it to his lips and blew softly. A faint, wobbly sound emerged. That's it, I encouraged. You're better than me already. Lucas tried again. This time the sound was louder, steadier. His eyes lit up, and he let out a breathy little laugh, the second one in 2 days. Something was shifting in him. The stiffness in his shoulders was melting away. His eyes, those wide, cautious eyes, were beginning to meet mine, not with fear, but curiosity. You're doing amazing, I told him gently. See, you don't need to be scared. Not here. For a moment, I thought I saw his lips part, as if he wanted to say something. But then he pressed the harmonica back to his mouth and blew a happy little tune instead. I didn't push. This was enough. Later that evening, as I tucked him into bed, he surprised me again. His small hand reached out, resting lightly on mine. "Good night, Emmy," he whispered. 2 words. Simple, but enough to make my chest ache in the best possible way. "Good night, Lucas," I whispered back. "Sweet dreams, my brave boy." And for the first time, I left his room feeling like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for all of us. It didn't take long for the backlash to come. 2 days after Lucas first called me Emmy Dr. Whitaker, and her team stormed into the house, like a squadron on a mission. "This has to stop," she said, slamming a thick file down on the kitchen counter. Her voice was sharp, precise, like a scalpel. "She's undoing months of structured progress." I stood my ground. "What progress?" I asked quietly. For 2 years, Lucas didn't say a word. Now he's laughing. He's humming. He's alive. "That's not the point," Whitaker snapped. "He's deviating from his routine. He's forming attachments that could be destabilizing." Destabilizing. My voice cracked with anger. "He's 5. He needs love, not lab experiments." "Miss Reed, you are not a therapist," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "You have no authority here." Before I could reply, Colonel Grant entered the room. The air shifted immediately. Colonel Whitaker said briskly, "You have to see reason. This woman's methods are reckless. She's undermining everything we've built." Grant didn't speak right away. He looked from Whitaker to me, his expression unreadable. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay calm. "You can listen to them," I said softly, meeting his gaze. "Or you can listen to your son." His jaw tightened. "Lucas doesn't need another protocol, sir," I continued. "He needs a father who sees him not a patient, not a diagnosis. Just him." Whitaker scoffed. "This is emotional manipulation. Nothing more." "Maybe emotions are exactly what he needs," I shot back. For a long moment, the room fell silent. Finally, Grant spoke. His voice was low, but carried the weight of command. "Enough." Whitaker stiffened. "I've heard your concerns, Doctor," he said curtly. "You'll prepare a full report. But for now, Miss Reed stays. Colonel." "That's an order." Whitaker's lips pressed into a thin line. She gathered her papers with a sharp movement and stormed out. When the door clicked shut, Grant turned to me. "You've made things complicated," he said quietly. "I wasn't trying to," I replied. "I just want what's best for Lucas." His eyes softened just for a second. "Don't make me regret this, Miss Reed." "I won't," I promised. But as he walked away, I couldn't help wondering, was he starting to believe me? Or was this just temporary? If someone had told me a month ago that I'd see Colonel Grant sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, I would have laughed. But there he was, in his crisp white t-shirt and sweatpants. Yes, sweatpants. Looking like he'd rather be facing enemy fire than the colorful blocks scattered in front of him. Lucas sat opposite, his small hands carefully stacking red and blue pieces. "Okay. What's the plan here?" Grant asked awkwardly, his deep voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Lucas didn't answer, of course. He just pushed a green block toward his father. Grant stared at it for a moment, then picked it up and set it crookedly on top of the stack. It wobbled and fell over. Lucas giggled. The sound startled Grant. He blinked then, smiled. A real smile. I stood quietly in the doorway, my heart twisting at the sight. This man who only days ago barked orders at me like I was a new recruit was trying. Clumsy and hesitant, yes, but trying. "Guess I need more practice," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Lucas handed him another block, still giggling. They kept building for the next 10 minutes. Each time the tower toppled, Grant winced, but Lucas laughed harder. I couldn't help smiling too. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't smooth. But it was progress. Later, after Lucas had fallen asleep, I found Grant alone in the kitchen. He stood at the counter, staring at a glass of water, like it held all the answers. That was new, he said, without looking up. You did well, I said softly. Better than I expected, actually. He huffed out a quiet laugh. I've led men into combat zones, negotiated peace treaties, and yet I couldn't figure out how to stack plastic blocks with my own son. Maybe that's because Lucas doesn't need a general, I said gently. He needs a dad. His hand tightened around the glass. I don't know how to be that. You're learning, I said, and he sees it. That's why he laughed today. Grant finally looked at me then. His eyes, usually so guarded, held something softer. Do you think it's too late? He asked quietly. I shook my head. It's never too late. For a moment, the kitchen felt too small. The air seemed charged like the calm before a summer storm. Then he looked away, clearing his throat. Tomorrow, you'll show me how to make those paper airplanes. I smiled. Deal. The first cracks in our fragile little world came one sunny afternoon. I was in the backyard with Lucas, showing him how to blow bubbles with a little plastic wand. His laughter rang out across the grass. Pure, unrestrained, the kind of sound that makes you forget all the weight you've been carrying. And then I heard voices from the patio. Colonel Grant was standing with an old friend, someone he'd served with judging by the uniform, and the easy way they spoke. Can't believe it, Alex, his friend said with a smirk, sipping from a glass of bourbon. You've gone soft. Grant stiffened. You sitting around building block towers and blowing bubbles. The Alex Grant I knew would have laughed at this. Grant didn't respond right away. It's different now, he said. Finally, his tone calm but edged with steel. Different, the man chuckled. You're letting some nanny and a 5-year-old turn you into a house cat. I froze. Some nanny. That stung more than I wanted to admit. Grant's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? His friend leaned in voice lowering, but not enough for me to miss. Men like us, we don't fit in this soft little family picture. You think this will last? Grant said nothing, and in that silence my stomach twisted. Maybe his friend was right. I wasn't part of this world of crisp uniforms, high expectations, and quiet judgment. I was just the girl from a small town, with second-hand clothes and calloused hands. Later that evening, I stayed in the kitchen longer than usual, wiping down an already clean counter, just to avoid seeing Grant. He found me anyway. You've been quiet, he said softly. I was just thinking, I murmured. He studied me for a moment, and I hated how easily he seemed to read my thoughts. Don't listen to him, he said gently. Jack's an old war buddy. He doesn't understand. Maybe he's right, I said before I could stop myself. Maybe I don't belong here, in your world. Grant shook his head. My world hasn't made sense in years, he said. But Lucas, and you're the first thing that does. My chest tightened, but I forced a small smile. I just don't want to mess this up, I whispered. You won't, he said firmly. Not if I can help it. The rain came down hard that night, rattling against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the small suitcase in the corner. I'd packed it hours ago, telling myself I was only being practical. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was preparing to leave. This house, this family. It wasn't my world, and no matter how much I cared, maybe it was time to step aside before I made things harder for everyone. A soft sound pulled me from my thoughts. I turned and saw Lucas standing in the doorway, his pajama shirt clinging to his small frame. His hair was damp, and his wide eyes shimmered in the dim light. "Lucas," I said softly. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" He didn't answer. He just crossed the room on bare feet and climbed onto the bed beside me. His little hand found mine. "Don't leave," he whispered. My breath caught. My voice cracked. "You make the monsters go away." He said his words quiet but certain. Tears blurred my vision. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tight. "Oh, Lucas," I whispered, "there are no monsters here. Not while I'm around." He nodded against my shoulder. Behind us, the floor creaked. I looked up and saw Colonel Grant standing in the shadows of the hallway. He'd heard everything. His expression was unreadable, part shock, part something softer, something I couldn't name. For a moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the steady drumming of rain on the roof. Then Grant stepped into the room. "You weren't really going to leave, were you?" he asked quietly. I hesitated. His gaze flicked to Lucas, still clutching me like a lifeline. "Because if you were," he said, his voice lower now, "I'm asking you not to." My chest tightened. "I don't know if I fit here," I admitted. "I don't want to disrupt your lives any more than I already have." "You haven't disrupted us," he said softly. "You've saved us. I should have known it wouldn't stay quiet forever." News travels fast on a military base, especially when it involves the famously stoic Colonel Alexander Grant and his once silent son. It started with whispers in the commissary. Then came the questions from officers' wives at the PX, and finally, a call from the base commander himself. I overheard part of the conversation from the hallway. "You've built a reputation," Alex the commander said, his voice clipped almost cold. "A man of discipline. Order. That image doesn't mix well with sentimentality." "I'm still the same man I've always been," Sir Grant replied evenly. "Are you? Because the way people talk, it sounds like you've gone soft." I heard the pause in Grant's voice, that little hitch that told me he was holding back words that could get him court-martialed. "Sir," he said finally, "what happens in my home is my business." "You're a public figure," the commander snapped. "Keep your image clean." The line went dead. I ducked back into the guest room before he saw me. My heart was pounding not just for him, but for myself. Because earlier that day I'd gotten a call too. A private school in Boston wanted to hire me. It wasn't just a job. It was the job, a full-time teaching position with benefits, resources, and room to grow. But as I stared at the offer letter on my phone, my chest felt heavy. Boston was 1,000 miles away. It wasn't here. It wasn't Lucas. That night, as I tucked him in, he grabbed my hand and gave me a sleepy smile. "Stay tomorrow," he whispered. My throat tightened. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, even though I wasn't sure it was true. Later I found Grant standing on the back porch, staring out into the darkness. "They called you too, didn't they?" I asked softly. He nodded. "They think I'm losing my edge. Are you?" He turned, and for once I saw no armor in his eyes. Maybe he said quietly, "But for the first time in years, I don't care." I wanted to say something, anything, but my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the school in Boston. A reminder. We need your decision by Friday. Grant noticed my hesitation. Something wrong, he asked. I forced a small smile. Just an email. Nothing urgent. But deep down, I knew it was the start of a choice that could change everything. I folded the last sweater and set it gently in the suitcase. The room felt heavier with every item I packed, like the air itself was trying to hold me back. Lucas was with his grandmother in the parlor, learning how to play the piano. Her idea, not mine. The sound of clumsy notes floated upstairs, each one tugging at my heart, like a thread pulled too tight. I zipped the suitcase closed and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone in my hand. We're excited to welcome you to Boston. The email read, Please confirm your start date. It was everything I thought I wanted. Stability, opportunity, a clean slate. So why did it feel like I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life? A knock at the door pulled me from my spiral. Emily. It was him. Come in, I said softly. Colonel Grant stepped inside his broad shoulders, filling the doorway, but there was no authority in his posture tonight. No rigid spine, no clipped tone. Just a man who looked tired. You're leaving, he said quietly. I opened my mouth to speak, but he held up a hand. Don't, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Don't say it. I lowered my gaze, ashamed of the tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. This job. It's a big opportunity, I said finally. And maybe it's for the best. For everyone. For everyone. His voice hardened. Or for you, I flinched. Then he stepped closer, his hand brushing against the edge of the suitcase. We need you here, Emily, he said. His voice was low, raw, nothing like the man who'd barked orders at me weeks ago. Not just Ethan. I looked up, startled by the softness in his eyes. Me too, he admitted. The words hung between us, fragile and heavy all at once. Alex, I whispered. I don't know when it happened, he said, shaking his head. But somewhere along the way you stopped being just the nanny. You became more. My chest tightened. Don't go, he said again, almost pleading now. Please. For a moment I couldn't breathe. And then a small voice drifted in from the hallway. Emmy Lucas stood there in his pajamas, clutching a toy truck to his chest. Are you going away? My heart broke clean in two. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside me only grew louder. On the nightstand, my phone blinked with a new message from the school in Boston. Final confirmation. Needed by morning. My chest tightened. This was supposed to be the dream. A stable career. My own apartment. Enough money to send home to my sister. So why did it feel like I was about to lose everything that mattered? Images flashed in my mind, like slides in an old projector. Lucas's small hand clutching mine as he whispered, You make the monsters go away. Colonel Grant Alex, standing in my doorway, his voice rough and unguarded as he said, We need you. Me too. I sat up, hugging my knees to my chest. Leaving meant freedom. No strings, no judgmental glances from his colleagues, no whispers about the nanny who dared overstep her place. But staying meant risking my heart. It meant opening myself up to a man still haunted by loss. To a little boy who'd already been abandoned once. What if I wasn't enough for them? What if I failed? The clock on the dresser ticked past 3 a.m. I pressed my palms to my eyes, willing the tears to stop. In my mind, I heard my grandmother's voice, the one I hadn't thought of in years. Sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful places, Mija. But you've got to decide if you're brave enough to walk them. I looked at the packed suitcase in the corner, at the phone still blinking with that message, and finally, at the small drawing Lucas had left on my pillow earlier that evening, a stick figure of him, me, and Alex, all holding hands beneath a big yellow sun. I didn't know how this story would end, but for the first time, I knew where I needed to be. I thought I was ready for her, but nothing could have prepared me for Eleanor Grant. She arrived unannounced, her driver pulling up in a sleek black sedan that looked like it had never seen a speck of dust. Eleanor stepped out in heels that clicked like gunfire against the stone walkway. Her pearl necklace gleamed in the sun, and her eyes, sharp calculating, landed on me like a sniper's scope. So she said crisply, her gaze sweeping over me from head to toe, "You're the woman I've heard so much about." I forced a polite smile. "Mrs. Grant, it's an honor to meet you." Her lips curved upward, but there was no warmth in it. "Emily Reed," she said, almost testing the name on her tongue. "A nanny from a small town, now playing house with my son and grandson." Alex stepped forward, then his jaw tight. Mother enough. But Eleanor wasn't finished. "You've inserted yourself into a family that has expectations, Emily," she said coldly. "This isn't a fairy tale. This is the Grant legacy. And you—" Her eyes narrowed. "You're just the hired help." The words hit harder than I expected, slicing through my carefully built resolve. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, a small voice cut through the tension. "She's not the help." We all turned. Ethan stood at the top of the stairs, his little hands balled into fists, his chin trembling, but his eyes blazing with determination. "She's my mom." The room went still. Eleanor's mouth opened slightly, just enough to show the first crack in her icy mask. Ethan Alex said gently, "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Ethan's voice wavered but grew stronger. "She takes care of me. She makes me laugh. She makes the monsters go away. That's what a mom does, right?" My heart clenched so tight I thought I'd break. Eleanor looked from Ethan to me, something unreadable flickering in her expression. "I see," she said finally, her tone softer, but still guarded. "Perhaps I underestimated how much of an impact you've had." Alex placed a steady hand on my back. "You've said your piece, Mother," he said firmly. "Now listen to mine. Emily is part of this family. Whether you accept that or not is up to you." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't over," she said quietly, before sweeping out of the room like a storm cloud. For a long moment after Eleanor left the house, felt impossibly still. I sat at the edge of the couch, my hands twisting nervously in my lap. "I shouldn't have come between you and your family," I said quietly, staring at the floor. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I don't belong in this world." Alex didn't answer right away. When I finally looked up, I saw him standing there, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "Emily," he said softly. "Yes." He took a step closer, then another, until he was standing right in front of me. "You are my family." My breath caught. He knelt down so we were eye to eye. "You, Ethan, and me," he continued. "That's all that matters. Not my mother, not her legacy, not what anyone else thinks." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Alex." He reached for my hand, his grip warm and steady. "You've already given Ethan what no one else could," he said. "And you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" I whispered. "Hope." A sound came from the stairs. Ethan stood there clutching a small, stuffed bear to his chest. "Are we A family now?" he asked softly. Alex smiled a real unguarded smile that made my heart ache. "Yes, buddy," he said. "We're a family." Ethan's face lit up. He bounded down the stairs and wrapped his arms around us both. I pulled him close, and for the first time in years, Alex did too. We sat there, the three of us tangled together, in an embrace that felt fragile and unshakable all at once. It wasn't perfect. The world outside would still judge. His mother would still fight us. But in that moment, none of it mattered. We had found our home, not in a house or a legacy or a name, but in each other. If you'd told me a month ago that I'd be sitting by a crackling fire, roasting marshmallows with Colonel Grant and his son, I would have laughed. But here we were. Ethan sat between us on a worn-out flannel blanket, his little hands sticky with melted sugar. "Look, Emmy," he said proudly, holding up a marshmallow so charred it looked like a lump of coal. "Perfect," I said with a grin. "You've invented campfire charcoal." He giggled, the sound echoing in the quiet woods. Alex, not Colonel anymore, leaned back on his elbows, watching his son with a softness I never thought I'd see in him. "He's never been camping before," Alex murmured. "Never even asked. But now, he's asking for everything I finished for him." Alex nodded, his lips twitching into a faint smile. Ethan turned to us, his face glowing in the firelight. "Can we do this every year?" he asked. "Every year," Alex teased. "What about every month?" Ethan's eyes went wide. "Really, if Emmy agrees," Alex said, glancing at me. The way he said my name made my stomach flutter. Every month, I agreed softly. "Deal." For a while we sat in companionable silence, watching the stars blink to life above the treetops. I couldn't remember the last time I felt so still, not restless, not worried. Just here. "Thank you," Alex said suddenly. "For what?" "For giving me my son back," he said quietly, "and for showing me there's more to life than orders and missions." His words settled over me like a warm blanket. Ethan crawled into my lap, resting his head against my chest. "Family campouts forever," he mumbled sleepily. I looked at Alex, and in that moment I didn't see the soldier, the disciplinarian, or the man haunted by loss. I saw him, the man who'd opened his heart for his son, and maybe for me too. 1 year later, the house that once echoed with silence now pulsed with life. I stood at the edge of the community center's small stagehands, clasped nervously, watching Ethan take his place in front of a modest crowd. His little harmonica gleamed in the warm lights. Alex stood beside me, his posture relaxed in a way I never thought possible when we first met. "He's got this," Alex whispered, his voice low but steady. I nodded, though my heart was racing faster than if I'd been the one on stage. Ethan looked so different now. The timid boy who used to line up his toy cars in perfect rows was gone. In his place stood a confident 6-year-old with a crooked smile and a spark in his eyes. He took a deep breath, raised the harmonica to his lips, and played the first note. It was clear, strong, and sweet. The audience, made up of parents, therapists, and kids from our newly opened therapy center, sat captivated as Ethan worked through a simple melody. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Ethan grinned and gave a shy little bow before hurrying off the stage straight into my arms. "You were amazing," I said, hugging him tight. He looked up at me with wide, proud eyes. I didn't even get scared this time. Alex crouched beside us, ruffling Ethan's hair. "That's because you're braver than any soldier I've ever met," he said warmly. Ethan beamed. As we made our way back to our seats, I stole a glance around the room. This place, the therapy center Alex and I had built from the ground up, was buzzing with laughter music and quiet conversations. There were no cold routines, no sterile white walls, just connection. Exactly what we'd promised ourselves we'd create. "You did this," Alex murmured in my ear as we sat down. I shook my head. "We did this." He smiled, but there was something in his eyes, something deeper, softer, that made my breath catch. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was living in someone else's world. This was our world, and it felt like home. The soft hum of voices filled the courtyard as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in warm hues of gold and rose. Alex stood at the podium, his dress uniform traded for a simple button-down and rolled-up sleeves. I watched from the edge of the crowd, Ethan perched on my hip, his small arms draped around my neck. Alex cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the parents, therapists, and children gathered to celebrate the grand opening of the therapy center. "I spent most of my life learning how to lead men into battle," he began. His voice was steady, but I heard the faint tremor of vulnerability beneath it. I knew discipline, structure. I thought those things would be enough to raise a son. He paused, his eyes finding mine across the courtyard. "But I was wrong," he said softly. "It took someone else to show me what my son and I truly needed." My breath caught. "She taught me how to love Alex," continued his voice thick with emotion. "And it saved us. It saved me." There was a quiet murmur in the crowd, and then stillness, the kind of stillness that only comes when words sink deep into people's hearts. I felt a lump rise in my throat as Alex stepped down from the podium and walked toward us. Ethan slid out of my arms and ran to him, his little hand slipping into his father's. Alex crouched to pick him up, holding him close. Then his eyes met mine again. For a moment, it felt like there was no one else in the world. Just the three of us. The boy who taught us how to be brave. The man who learned to let go of his armor. And me, the woman who never expected to find a home here. Alex reached out his free hand. "Come here," he said gently. I stepped forward, and when he pulled me into their embrace, I felt the weight of every lonely night, every fear, every doubt melt away. We weren't perfect, but we were whole. And as the courtyard lights flickered on, I realized something. I didn't just find a job here, or even a love story. I found my family, my home. The garden was quiet that night. Fireflies danced lazily in the warm summer air. As Ethan chased them, his laughter ringing out like wind chimes. Alex stood beside me, his hand brushing mine. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. This peace, the soft glow of lanterns, the sound of Ethan's small feet pattering across the grass was enough. A year ago, this man had been a stranger, a fortress of discipline and grief. His son, a little boy, locked in silence, building walls of his own. And me, I was just a woman looking for a job. But somewhere between bedtime stories and paper airplanes, between whispered fears and hard-won smiles, something shifted. I thought I came here to save a boy. I whispered more to myself than to Alex. He heard me anyway. "You did save him," he said softly. "But you saved me too." My throat tightened as he reached for my hand, his fingers warm and sure around mine. "And you saved me," I murmured. Alex's smile was small, but steady. The smile of a man who'd stopped running from his own heart. Ethan ran toward us. Then a jar of fireflies clutched to his chest. "Look, Emmy," he cried. They're glowing for us. I knelt down and cupped his face in my hands. They are, sweetheart, I said with a smile. Just like you. He beamed, and for a moment all I could see was light pouring out of this little boy who'd once been afraid of the world. Alex crouched beside us, wrapping an arm around Ethan and pulling me close too. We sat there, the three of us, tangled together under the stars. It wasn't the life I'd planned. It wasn't the future I thought I wanted. But it was ours. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was standing on the outside, looking in. I was home.